Hello, good afternoon. So my name's Chris Thomas. Great to be here talking with you today. When I first saw the agenda, I saw that I was actually the last session before lunch, which is normally a pretty bad session to have, right? Being right before a break and keeping people away from food. But it turns out I'm the last session during lunch. So I'm not sure if that's better or worse. But hopefully you left something for me. I haven't eaten yet because I'm up here talking, so hopefully there's still something there. So today I want to talk to you about semi-advanced threats versus the semi-advanced infrastructure. And you're probably thinking that's kind of a weird topic, right? And even the organisers thought it was a bit weird as well. They said, surely EXTRAHOP's better than that. You can detect advanced threats, not semi-advanced, right? But much like we're going through digital transformation, attackers are going through a transformation as well. And we'll talk about what they're doing there. What we're currently seeing, where we're tracking threat actor groups and the trends that we see the bad guys doing, right? We're seeing a rise of this sort of cyber mercenary. We're seeing conflict in Europe at the moment between Russia and Ukraine. We're seeing not necessarily state-sponsored groups, like we talked about advanced persistent threats and nation states for many, many years, but we're seeing the rise now of not state-sanctioned, but state-tolerated groups that are sort of taking part in these conflicts as well. And they're kind of moving their focus and attention to whatever cause kind of suits them at the point in time. So we're seeing this sort of rising from the ashes of those state-sponsored groups to being state-tolerated. And because the government tolerates them, they see that as a license to do what they're doing without getting in trouble. What we're starting to see, though, is they're starting to turn that attention into ways that they can monetize and use those skills. Much like us, we're going through cost of living crisis. I know in Singapore, my rent's almost doubled in the last couple of years. My salary certainly hasn't. Right? So the threat actors are going through a similar thing of how they can monetize their skills and actually get paid. So we're starting to see new targets. And we've had some parallels to this in the past, the idea of the privateer, or what we refer to now really as a pirate, right? Going back to Elizabethan times, Queen Elizabeth, when she had her ships coming back into port from exploring around the world. If they brought back some antiquities from Spain or some other treasures, they'd take that on board and they wouldn't prosecute, they'd sort of take them and probably put them in a museum somewhere. But if they came back and they interrupted their spice trade or English breakfast tea, for example, then they'd be in a lot of trouble. So there's been historical parallels of this, not necessarily state-sponsored, but state-tolerated kind of activity in the past. And so today, and I've got to give kudos to our marketing team for coming up with a great image there of a modern-day pirate sitting on the computer. They tried to do a version of that with my face on there instead, but it really didn't work, so glad we went with that one. So what's going to happen when the states actually stop sponsoring these threat actor groups? What are they going to do? Where are they going to go? Right? They're going to find a way to raise some money and monetize these skills that they've picked up. And we've always talked about critical infrastructure, but what about the next layer down? Right? Critical infrastructure, pretty well protected, a lot of money to spend, resources for cybersecurity, but the next layer down, right, is that soft, white underbelly that maybe isn't as well protected. There's more organisations, more types of companies there to be able to target, so it's quite a rich environment for them to go after. So we know who critical infrastructure is, right? Banking, finance, power generation, wastewater, things like that. But what's a definition for semi-critical? I guess you could say it's kind of everything else, right? Looking through things like small and mid-sized logistics providers, right? Modern economy, we're very reliant on online shopping and having deliveries, and we expect those deliveries to come on a regular basis and in a reliable way. I know during the last few years, my wife and I spent so much time buying stuff online. Every day there'd be a delivery, and when the doorbell rings, we look at each other and say, what did you buy this time? So I don't know what it is, right? But imagine all these different little security or the logistics providers probably using the same sort of software to manage their fleets, right? There's probably not too many different vendors producing the software to manage this. Imagine there's a vulnerability or a flaw that gets into that and it can interrupt and disrupt a lot of deliveries and things like that. So logistics providers, public transportation systems, we've seen examples of ransomware attacks against railway systems, against bus systems. I've got an example later on from San Francisco. These are the type of things that we're starting to see targeted by these threat actors. And why do they target it? Well, it can be just to push their cause, raise awareness, that hacktivism type approach, but I don't think we see people doing things just for the sake of raising awareness anymore. We're seeing more and more of these attacks based on financial motivation, right? Organised crime, ransomware threat actors, that's the primary threat that we're seeing today. Like a few years ago, I'd be up here, we'd be talking about nation state, advanced persistent threat, where the objective is to get into an environment, stay there, have persistence, and constantly leak information out. Today, we're seeing a big impact with ransomware happening very, very quickly with these threat actor groups. So that's why they're targeting this infrastructure, because it's likely to be slightly less protected than the critical infrastructure as well. And what's some of the economic impact we expect to see from this kind of thing? Well, you've got things like rising unemployment, right? If small organisation, they're hit by ransomware, they've got things they need to pay out based on that, they may slow down hiring, right? They may actually cause an issue there. We see decreases in productivity, in financial integrity. It can put a lot of companies out of business. They just can't recover from the cost of either paying the ransom or the other ongoing costs associated with recovery as well. And we see inflation goods and services. I don't know if my landlord got hit by a ransomware attack, that's why my rent's gone up so much, but maybe that's the case. But we have seen some economic instances of this from past precedents, things like JBS, right, the meat processing company. When that got hit a few years ago, we see a increase in the cost of meat. Subsequently, right, they had to put their costs up, or they put their prices up to cover the costs of what they went through to recover from their ransomware. Similarly, the Colonial Pipeline, probably argue these days they're more critical infrastructure than semi-critical. But again, once they went through their issue with the ransomware, after they recovered, the prices of the fuel went up, right, based on having to recover their costs. So we do see this impact being passed on to the consumers having to put up with higher costs. And some examples of other attacks on semi-critical infrastructure. So there's a San Francisco Municipal Transport Agency, or MUNI as it's referred to. How did it impact? Their systems went down. People weren't able to catch the bus. They weren't able to get to work. So a lot of people reliant on public transport disrupts not just their day, but also disrupts the services that they're trying to provide. So a lot of things against restaurants and service industry where people can't get to work. We see things like Jersey City municipal services, right? So garbage collection, wastewater, things like that having an effect there as well. And I looked through some of these, trying to find an example for the Philippines. I actually couldn't find one. So I've got these US-based ones for the moment. This one is an interesting one. So a small sort of local council, if you like, with their planning department, they were able to get hit by ransomware. Their email system went down. They came up with a way of using Gmail to be able to still communicate and keep providing services. I'm sure all those Gmail accounts got disabled, right? They all got accounted for. None of them are sort of lying around dormant anymore. But they were able to do that. You can just imagine the impact that would have on planning and construction workers and so on, sort of down the line. They seem like small things, but they have big impacts down different layers. There was an example also on a school district, right? This was actually a bit of a concern. Lots of information being leaked, not just from teachers, but students and parents. Information that's been published that can't be taken back. You can't change that information, so quite a big impact there as well. And as I said, I did look for examples for the Philippines. I don't know, I couldn't find any. I don't know if that's because we're all really secure and doing a great job, or just really doing a good job keeping things out of the press and not being reported so much. You see the headlines like ransomware attacks are surging, but it seems like no big impact has happened yet. So well done so far, and hopefully we can keep that going. All right, so that's a little bit of the background of what we're seeing, but what makes the semi-critical infrastructure so vulnerable? Let's take a quick look at that. So there are weak points that are not necessarily unique to this sort of semi-critical infrastructure, but probably more pronounced. We see legacy technology, we see legacy protocols being used that should be decommissioned, and overall an immature approach to cybersecurity. Things like legacy network protocols, and SMB version 1 is quite an interesting one. Can anyone put their hand up and say that they know if they're running SMB version 1 in their network or not? All right, no one's put their hand up. You can't really tell. We do with EXTRAHOP, we provide network visibility. We're doing some proof of concepts with various customers in Manila at the moment, and all of them we are seeing SMB version 1 in use in the network, right? And SMB version 1, it's a big one. It was used, the vulnerabilities were used as part of the WannaCry ransomware a couple of years ago. You may have heard of Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar, right? They all spread using the vulnerabilities in SMB version 1. So important to decommission old protocols like this. We've seen over $1 billion worth of damages from cyber attacks using SMB version 1. And other legacy protocols as well, like LLMNR, which is a network discovery protocol within Microsoft's Active Directory environments. We see NTLM, an old authentication protocol, which was decommissioned in 2010. It was deprecated, right? But it's still being used on networks today. There are more secure alternatives, but it seems to take a while to get them implemented and rolled out across the network. So keep an eye on the legacy protocols. We also see that over-reliance on legacy systems and frameworks, and we've got WordPress there as kind of a perennial company that gets beaten up quite a lot as far as vulnerabilities and the legacy systems that are in place, people don't update. But what's actually interesting, I guess the exception that proves the rule, working one of the proof of concepts here, we actually saw a lot of data transfer with the MoveIt software protocol, right? So MoveIt has been in the press the last couple of months, some big vulnerabilities, companies that attacked with some massive victims around the world. And we saw on this banking network, there was MoveIt software, right? We could see it on the network. But in their case, it was an older version of MoveIt that didn't use the component that was actually vulnerable. So in their case, by being on the legacy system, they were less vulnerable to attack. So maybe that's the exception that proves the rule. Normally, we need to keep up to date, move off the legacy systems to make sure they're up to date and have the secure compliance that we need. So what can we do about it? Right? They're some of the bad things that we've seen. What are things we can do to actually improve the security? You probably want me to say, oh, new security, we need to buy a new tool. Not necessarily the case, right? Security, hygiene, and hardening, that's stuff that it's hard to do, but it's stuff that we need to do, right? Go through disable the unused ports. We just saw from that security scorecard presentation earlier, all of those open ports that are being scanned and looked for on the internet. People are just looking for open ports, and if they find something open, they'll try and exploit it to get access to a system. So if you don't need it, turn it off. So remove the unused ports, replace those legacy protocols, not just SMB version 1, but also things like older versions of encryption like SSL and TLS. We still see TLS 1.0 and weak ciphers being used. Make sure they get upgraded to the newer ones, TLS 1.2 or 1.3, to be able to have proper security there. Having better inspection with application firewalls, updating those legacy frameworks, and having access control lists to control, if you need to have a legacy system like that running, control who can access it and make sure you monitor that and see what's going on. And lastly, improve password hygiene. Everyone hates this one. I'm looking forward to the day where I can move away from using passwords, but today, they still exist. So make sure that not just the passwords are secure, but any legacy protocols that are running with clear text authentication, make sure that they're removed as well, so they reduce the attack surface there. Once you've got those things, then we can start looking at some fancy things like zero trust, right? We need to do the homework, we need to do the basics first before we start moving into these more fancy sort of architectures. And part of zero trust, part of it is obviously segmenting your network, but an important part of zero trust is also monitoring the network to see what's actually taking place and ensuring that the only paths to the applications that are defined or that are being used are the ones defined through the zero trust framework. So constant monitoring and visibility of the environment is a key thing. And we've heard visibility mentioned a few times already today as well. It's quite a key aspect to understand what's happening inside the environment. And so to combat that modern privateer, much like we had the rise of lighthouses and ability to light up the shore to stop ships crashing into it over the years, visibility of the network is also important to be able to see what legacy protocols might be running. I thought they were all turned off, but I can see they're active on the network. I can see Telnet, right? I can see NTLM version 1 and clear text protocols being used. Make sure that you have the visibility to see where they're in use so that you can take those steps, as we saw, to reduce the attack surface and not be attacked by these new semi-advanced threats. So call to action, do these things, change passwords, no default passwords, get rid of clear text authentication, monitor your network traffic, ensure new assets are running secure protocols from the start, so you don't have to clean them up later on, and then have a plan for eliminating those insecure protocols and just get rid of them so that you're using the more modern version, reducing that attack surface. That's my call to action for you today. 2 seconds to go. Thank you very much for your time.